What if the true power of the Vatican has never worn white, but black? This profound question has haunted the hallowed halls of Rome for centuries, stirring curiosity and apprehension in equal measure. In the very heart of Rome, where ancient cobblestone streets elegantly curve like vital veins toward the venerable seat of Christendom, whispers resonate, older and more persistent than the daily ringing of the bells of St. Peter's Basilica. These hushed tales speak of a mysterious man whose robes are as dark as the deepest midnight, a figure not cloaked in the brilliant papal white, but rather enveloped in an aura of profound shadow. His authority, it is said, subtly permeates through locked doors and along candle-lit corridors, influencing decisions far beyond the public eye. The world widely recognizes the Pope as the Vicar of Christ, majestically seated high on the throne of Peter, adorned in resplendent gold and surrounded by elaborate ceremony. Yet for countless centuries, an intriguing question has persisted, a silent query that refuses to be dismissed. Does another man, largely unseen and deliberately unnamed in the bustling streets, wield an equal or even greater sway over the spiritual and temporal affairs of the Church? He is often referred to as the Black Pope, a title not born of mockery, but rather derived from the somber robe of his pivotal office, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, more commonly known as the Jesuits. Rome itself, the Eternal City, appears to harbor an intimate knowledge of this enigmatic figure, holding secrets as effortlessly as it cradles its ancient ruins. By day, the golden sun playfully glances off ornate fountains and expansive piazzas, with tourists drifting through like mesmerized moths drawn to a marble flame. But as night descends, long, eerie shadows stretch across the majestic domes, and in the narrow, labyrinthine alleys tucked behind the colossal Vatican walls, one can almost discern the faint rustle of dark robes, the barely audible scrape of boots upon ancient stone, and the low murmur of voices that deliberately avoid the revealing light. It is precisely here, within the hidden, unassuming residences of Jesuit generals, that pivotal decisions were once whispered into existence, choices that possessed the power to sway entire kingdoms and alter the course of nations. Here, there was no need for a visible throne or a glittering crown, and yet a command issued from these discreet chambers could ripple outward with unseen force, potentially moving armies, silencing inconvenient dissent, and even subtly redirecting the very flow of history itself. The Black Pope does not grandly wave from sun-drenched balconies or ceremoniously lift chalices in the vast expanse of St. Peter's Square, for all to witness. Instead, he moves with an almost imperceptible silence, binding men with sacred vows that are far more unyielding and enduring than any carved marble. This very notion deeply unsettled both powerful monarchs and influential cardinals, prompting a profound question. If the Pope in white served as the beloved shepherd of the faithful, then what precisely was this other Pope, cloaked in an enigmatic black? To some, he was revered as the ultimate hidden strategist, the Church's most loyal and sharpest sword, ever ready to defend its interests. To others, however, he was perceived as a formidable rival, a shadowy threat, a silent emperor who ruled from the depths of the shadows. And so, the legend steadily grew, fueled by both awe and apprehension. Was the Black Pope truly the most powerful man in Rome, his influence eclipsing all others? Could his whispered word genuinely carry more weight than a solemn papal decree? Or was the intriguing title nothing more than a persistent rumor, greatly exaggerated and swollen by centuries of both fear and intense fascination? As night gently falls across the city, the bells toll softly, each resonant note rolling like a gentle wave through the ancient streets, serving as a poignant reminder of Rome's enduring grandeur. Yet, beneath that magnificent grandeur lies a darker, more mysterious current, a powerful undercurrent inextricably tied to a name whispered with a potent mixture of both reverence and dread. This extraordinary narrative begins not within the opulent confines of marble palaces, but in a humble cave, with a broken soldier kneeling in profound silence. It commences with a powerful vision that would ultimately give birth to an army unlike any other the world had ever known. But before embarking on that journey to the cave, before witnessing the dawn of the Jesuits, let us linger for a moment longer in Rome itself. Imagine standing before the colossal, awe-inspiring dome of St. Peter's as dusk deepens, and the sky above bruises into shades of profound purple and inky black. Pilgrims, their faces etched with devotion, fall into quiet prayer, their flickering candles resembling fragile terrestrial stars against the encroaching darkness. Behind them, beyond the vast square, hidden deep within sacred halls where no ordinary pilgrim ever treads, a solitary man in a black robe walks slowly, deliberately, his footsteps echoing softly off the polished stone, a sound that is both hushed and utterly final, like the gentle turning of a momentous page. The air within these ancient walls is heavy, thick with the accumulated weight of centuries of history and silent prayers. And somewhere, precisely between the realms of unwavering faith and immense temporal power, between the conspicuously seen and the mysteriously unseen, the potent shadow of the Black Pope perpetually lingers. And as the deepening night draws its heavy veil across the ancient city of Rome, the fundamental questions persist, echoing through the silence. Who truly holds the authentic keys to power within these sacred precincts? Whose unseen hand subtly moves the pieces across the grand chessboard of history? And how did a single soldier's solemn vow, uttered in profound pain and utter solitude, give rise to a power so immense that it would eventually shake the foundations of kingdoms and profoundly unsettle even the popes themselves? The answers to these compelling questions lie ahead, patiently waiting in the profound silence of history. The hour grows late. The bustling city gradually quiets its restless pulse, and the shadows deepen with each passing moment. Close your eyes and allow yourself to follow the faint sound of footsteps through the winding, ancient alleys of Rome, until the smooth, cold stone beneath your feet eventually gives way to the rough, primal earth of a cave, and the extraordinary story truly begins. This epic tale commences not with the glittering of crowns, nor with the solemn pronouncements of papal decrees, but with the dramatic fall of a single soldier. Ignatius of Loyola was once a man forged of steel and fire, a proud Spanish knight possessing the confident swagger of nobility and the fierce pride of a seasoned warrior. He passionately craved the exhilarating thrill of battle, the distinguished honor of duels, and the glorious triumphs of conquest. But one fateful day, high upon the formidable walls of Pamplona, all of his ambitions and his world shattered irrevocably. A devastating cannonball tore through both stone and bone alike, brutally shattering his leg and leaving him writhing in unimaginable agony beneath the deafening roar of war. The once proud soldier, who had stood so tall and unyielding, now lay broken, his magnificent sword no longer a potent weapon, but merely a fading, painful memory of a life now lost. His subsequent recovery was long, excruciatingly cruel, and filled with an almost unbearable silence. Confined to the ancient walls of his family's castle, his fiercely proud spirit strained relentlessly against the crushing weight of helplessness. He desperately begged for the thrilling, chivalric tales of heroic knights and romantic adventures to ease his restless, tormented mind. Instead, the only books within his reach were the lives of the saints, sacred texts heavy with profound visions, rigorous penances, and the inspiring stories of men who had willingly given everything for their unwavering faith. At first, he stubbornly resisted, his heart still clinging desperately to the echoing memories of swordplay and glory. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the words within those sacred texts began to pierce him in ways that no steel blade ever had. The restless knight, once consumed by worldly ambition, began to dream of an entirely different kind of battlefield, the profound and eternal one of the soul. Months later, limping and still bearing the visible scars of his ordeal, he resolutely set off on a pilgrimage, bravely abandoning his courtly ambitions for the unknown, divinely guided path of God. His determined steps eventually led him to the small, serene Catalonian town of Manresa. There, on the tranquil edge of the River Cardner, stood a cave, dark, unwelcoming, yet profoundly silent enough for a man to truly hear the soft, eternal whispers of eternity. Ignatius entered that humble cave not as a proud knight, nor as a noble of high birth, but as a pilgrim stripped bare of all earthly pretenses and desires. Days slowly stretched into weeks, and weeks gradually lengthened into months within its silent confines. He fasted relentlessly until his body trembled with weakness, and scourged himself until the lines of physical pain were deeply carved through his skin. By the flickering light of a single candle, he wept tears of remorse and hope. He prayed fervently, and he wrestled fiercely with demons, both those of his own mind and those he perceived as real. His mind, once meticulously sharpened for the brutal art of battle, now turned inward, meticulously dissecting the nature of sin, the pull of desire, and the very essence of obedience. It was there, within the profound solitude of that cave, that powerful visions came to him. Some accounts suggest he saw the Virgin Mary herself, radiant in a blinding light that seemed to pierce through the solid stone. Others claim he was shown a cosmic battlefield where countless souls hung precariously in balance, with angels and demons locked in an eternal spiritual war. What Ignatius himself humbly confessed was simpler, yet no less profoundly impactful. He experienced an overwhelming sense of clarity, a vivid vision of precisely how the human spirit could be guided, meticulously disciplined, and rigorously trained, much like a formidable army. He began to write, diligently scratching his profound thoughts onto pages that would one day become the renowned spiritual exercises, a manual not of physical war, but of ultimate surrender, a powerful spiritual weapon forged from deep silence and unwavering obedience. The cave profoundly transformed him. The swaggering knight of old was gone, replaced by a man utterly remade, a devoted soldier of God who now perceived the world not as castles to be stormed and conquered, but as precious souls to be won for Christ. His physical armor was shed, but he now carried a far sharper, more potent blade. The unwavering conviction that men could be trained to absolute devotion, bound together in a spiritual unity even stronger than steel. From that profound darkness, he emerged with a singular, unwavering mission. He would gather companions not for earthly conquest, but for the sacred cause of Christ. He would meticulously forge an order unlike any other, one that would move not by the lure of riches or the prestige of titles, but by the relentless pursuit of discipline and absolute obedience. Centuries later, pilgrims from all corners of the world still kneel in that same humble cave at Manresa. The ancient walls are scarred with the soot of countless candles, and the air within is heavy with prayers whispered into the profound silence. The cold stone itself seems to remember the weeping of a broken night, the rhythmic scratching of his pen, and the tremor of a man utterly remade by divine grace. From the deep shadows of that unassuming cave would ultimately emerge the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, and from the sacred vow of one broken soldier would rise a spiritual force so disciplined, so loyal, and so profoundly influential that kings and popes alike would eventually come to both respect and, at times, fear it. The night outside the cave was still and serene. The river glided silently by, its waters reflecting the shimmering stars above, which seemed like countless watchful eyes. In that profound silence, a powerful seed was planted, one that would one day blossom into both immense glory and deep suspicion, profound devotion and unsettling dread. For in the echoing resonance of Ignatius's transformative visions, the distinct shadow of another enigmatic figure would one day appear, the man the world would come to call the Black Pope. But for now, in the quiet solitude of the cave at Manresa, there was only a solitary pilgrim, a flickering candle, and the soft, almost inaudible sound of quiet pages turning. The hour deepened, the cave grew darker, and somewhere within that stone-laden silence, the future began to stir with an unseen, potent energy. Years gracefully passed after the profound experience in the cave of Manresa. Ignatius of Loyola walked the winding roads of Europe with the quiet, determined silence of a man carrying a sacred, secret flame within his heart. He diligently studied, he preached with fervent conviction, and he steadily gathered companions, men who, much like himself, felt the compelling call of something far larger and more significant than their individual selves. They were not numerous at first, a mere handful of earnest scholars and devout seekers, all drawn by the magnetic charisma of a man who spoke not with the booming thunder of authority, but with a quiet, unshakable certainty. Paris became the crucial crucible of their burgeoning union. In narrow, dimly lit student rooms, illuminated by the soft glow of candlelight, they prayed together with shared purpose, spoke passionately of their collective mission, and whispered of grand dreams that stretched far beyond the confining walls of the university. They were men from diverse lands, speaking different tongues, yet one unifying vision bound them inextricably to serve Christ with absolute obedience wherever their spiritual path might ultimately lead them. It was there, in the significant year of 1534, that the pivotal moment finally arrived. On the solemn feast of the Assumption, Ignatius led his small, devoted band up the gentle slope of Montmartre, from which they could gaze out over the spires and the lengthening shadows of the bustling city below. The sacred hill was still and quiet then, marked only by a small, humble chapel, its ancient stones weathered by time and elements, yet patiently waiting to witness a profound vow that would ripple outward through countless centuries, forever altering the course of history. Within the hallowed confines, the myriad candles flickered gently in the warmth of the August atmosphere, their luminous points trembling akin to delicate spirits, each flame a fragile testament to the solemnity unfolding. Individually, each of the fervent devotees descended to their knees, their forms sinking against the unyielding, frigid stone of the floor, a physical act of profound humility. Placing their hands upon the consecrated altar, they articulated sacred promises that ignited within them with an intensity comparable to a searing flame, pledges of material destitution and virtuous purity, but preeminently an unwavering submission, not to the ephemeral authority of earthly monarchs or sovereign realms, but directly to the divine Creator and to the profound spiritual undertaking that beckoned them. Furthermore, they committed themselves, should conditions permit, to embark upon a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, intending to emulate the sacred journey of the Messiah and dedicate their very existence to this sacred calling. This particular juncture represented an experience both profoundly poignant and simultaneously formidable in its implications. For embedded within their spoken declarations lay an unconditional capitulation of self, a level of devotion more comprehensive and unwavering than any feudal knight had ever rendered to a sovereign lord. These individuals were distinctly not traditional warriors clad in resplendent mail, preparing for temporal combat. Rather, their sacred commitments were meticulously forged from an unyielding resolve, akin to tempered iron, a complete renunciation of worldly possessions, personal ease, and familial bonds, dedicating their entire being solely to their divine purpose and absolute submission to a higher will. Once these solemn promises had been articulated, a profound stillness permeated the entire chapel, a hallowed quiet that seemed to absorb all sound. Beyond its ancient confines, the bustling metropolis maintained its unceasing cadence, entirely oblivious to the profound transformative force that had just been kindled upon that venerable hill. Yet, confined within those sacred walls, a unique fraternity had been solemnly established, a burgeoning fellowship destined to evolve into the formidable and influential Society of Jesus, an organization whose future impact was then unimaginable. Subsequently, when the ecclesiastical authority formally recognized their burgeoning order, an additional pivotal vow was incorporated, an undertaking that would distinctly set the members of the Society of Jesus apart from all other religious congregations of the era. Beyond the three conventional commitments of material destitution, virtuous purity, and general submission, they undertook an additional solemn commitment, a singular devotion and unconditional fealty to the pontiff himself. This was far from a perfunctory assurance, rather, it constituted a sacred oath explicitly stating their readiness to journey wherever the Holy Father might dispatch them, even to the remotest corners of the globe, if so commanded, unreservedly and instantaneously, without demur or delay. Such profound commitments bestowed upon them a formidable efficacy and a clear, unwavering objective. They effectively transformed into a spiritual legion devoid of conventional armaments, yet possessing a rigor and precision in their discipline that surpassed the keenest edge of any physical weapon. During a turbulent era marked by widespread religious upheaval and the Protestant Reformation, when the very foundations of faith appeared to splinter and dissipate across Europe, the Jesuits would advance with a cohesion and unwavering solidarity that instilled apprehension in secular rulers and offered profound solace to the Roman pontiffs, a bulwark against the rising tides of dissent. Nevertheless, solemn declarations articulated in the hushed obscurity of a sacred chapel invariably possessed profound significance, reverberating far beyond their initial utterance. As the centuries gradually unfolded, persistent speculation would invariably attach itself to those initial vows, embroidering them with an air of mystique and unease. Murmurs began to circulate concerning clandestine rites concealed from public scrutiny, and an unquestioning submission so profound that it appeared to override individual moral judgment. Mythic narratives recounted tales of searing iron crosses pressed against living flesh, of formidable pronouncements uttered amidst blood and fire, ensnaring men through methods that the broader world struggled to comprehend, feeding a growing legend. For the immediate present, however, the immediate circumstances remained subdued, devoid of any outward dramatic display. A modest assembly of individuals descended the gentle incline of Montmartre in the soft, waning daylight, their figures silhouetted against the fading sky. Their spirits were ignited with fervent zeal, their entire existences wholly consecrated. The sprawling urban expanse continued its subtle thrum beneath them, entirely ignorant of the momentous fraternity newly established. Within their measured steps, one could almost discern the faint reverberation of a percussive rhythm. Not one signaling imminent conflict, but rather something slower, more deliberate, akin to the very cadence of historical progression undergoing a profound reorientation. From the profound revelation granted to a wounded military man, Ignatius Loyola, a distinct spiritual institution had materialized, destined soon to become the pontiff's most incisive instrument, his most devoted protector, and his most artful implement in the grand theater of Christendom. Yet fidelity, much like authority, inherently possesses intricate complexities, often breeding unforeseen consequences. Ominous premonitions already extended in their wake, carrying with them the profound interrogative: if submission is utterly absolute, then to what ultimate authority does such a formidable force genuinely owe its allegiance, when the lines of command appear so singular? As twilight deepens, the environs of Montmartre descend in tranquility, cloaked in the quietude of a nascent destiny. The sacred pledges have been articulated, binding souls to an extraordinary path. A profound catalyst for change has been ignited, ensuring that the global landscape stands irrevocably altered by the actions of these few committed men. The sacred promises made at Montmartre resembled incipient embers within parched vegetation, initially modest in scale, yet destined to proliferate into something immense and irrepressible. What commenced as a modest fraternity of a select few rapidly transformed into an unprecedented spiritual legion, unlike any the Church had ever previously encountered. These adherents would not don conventional armor, nor wield traditional weaponry of steel. Instead, their formidable arsenal comprised intellectual texts and persuasive rhetoric. Their primary arenas of engagement were educational institutions and ecclesiastical rostrums. Their intricate strategies were meticulously crafted through scholarly endeavor and contemplative thought, rather than military stratagems. Nevertheless, their rigor mirrored that of seasoned military personnel. Their submission was absolute, and their influence continually expanded across the known world. When formal approbation from the Holy See materialized in 1540, definitively endorsed by Pope Paul III, the Society of Jesus was formally inaugurated into existence, receiving its official charter. Rome now possessed an unprecedented instrument within its command, a meticulously honed tool for spiritual warfare. The pontiff had been entrusted not with a mere hired military contingent, but with something profoundly more formidable, a rigorously trained cadre of individuals who would venture into territories others hesitated to enter, who would obey without hesitation, and who would forsake personal ease, familial bonds, and even their mortal existence for the sake of their divine objective. Their calling was to wage a conflict, not through physical weaponry, but through an unwavering spiritual resolve, a battle for the very souls of men. Europe, at this juncture, found itself engulfed in the tumultuous conflagration of the Reformation. Established dogmas crumbled, and religious conviction splintered into a multitude of dissenting interpretations, threatening the very fabric of the Catholic Church. The very supremacy of the Roman See wavered under the resonant pronouncements of Martin Luther and the pervasive proliferation of Reformed ideologies. Amidst this profound chaos, the Jesuits were envisioned as the pontiff's vanguard forces, the paramount ecclesiastical legion, meticulously trained to re-establish doctrinal stability, to win back spiritual allegiances, and to guide adherents once more into the fold of Roman Catholicism, staunchly defending papal authority. Consequently, their influence radiated globally with the unstoppable force of an inferno, extending like intricate veins across the continents. They meticulously constructed educational institutions characterized by enduring architectural structures and fostered cultivated intellectual prowess, providing instruction not merely to the indigent, but also to the progeny of royalty and aristocracy, thereby shaping future leaders. They assumed the role of spiritual advisors to sovereign rulers, discreetly imparting guidance into ears adorned with emblems of power. Their intrepid journeys took them to the remotest frontiers of charted territories, embarking upon vessels that transported them to India, Japan, China, and the Americas, regions where religious conviction was either tenuous or unfamiliar, and where they diligently sowed the tenets of Roman Catholicism in previously uncultivated spiritual ground. In every locale they traversed, they manifested an identical rigorous regimen, consistent pedagogical instruction, and unwavering fidelity to their order and its mission. A Jesuit was indoctrinated to perceive himself not as an autonomous entity, but rather as an integral component of a collective organism animated by a singular purpose, a body moving with one unified will. The highest-ranking leader, the superior general, residing in the Eternal City, could dispatch a written directive, and thousands of miles distant, a man clad in somber vestments would execute it unreservedly, as though the command had emanated directly from divine authority itself. So profound was their commitment. This represented an unprecedented influence, previously unexercised by the ecclesiastical institution, a power not derived from armies of steel, but rather from a clandestine tapestry of intellects and volitions. Within royal courts, they ascended to the esteemed position of confidants and counselors. In academic institutions, they meticulously molded the intellectual and moral character of burgeoning generations. On arduous missions, they stoically withstood privation, tempests, and mortality, establishing symbols of Christian faith in previously unconverted territories. To their ardent supporters, they were revered as champions, intellectually gifted, courageously resolute, and completely consecrated to their cause. To their adversaries, however, they were perceived as profoundly perilous, excessively regimented, overly influential, and unduly faithful to an undisclosed superior. The pontiff himself, resplendent in white vestments, served as the public embodiment of the ecclesiastical hierarchy, visible and adored. Yet he now commanded a legion arrayed in somber vestments, an army clothed in black. These were men who responded directly to a leader from within their own ranks, the superior general, whom certain individuals would, with time, begin to refer to as the Black Pontiff. This appellation lacked formal recognition and was not even vocalized openly within the confines of the Vatican, but it proliferated clandestinely, growing like an ever-present shadow. For if the Jesuits obeyed him with a fidelity surpassing that accorded to secular monarchs, did that not effectively render him a quasi-pontiff in his own right, wielding an unseen but potent spiritual dominion? Thus, beneath the awe-inspiring grandeur of St. Peter's Dome, the Church had engendered a profound contradiction, a paradox born of its own defense. The Jesuits stood as the pontiff's most unwavering champions, serving as his impenetrable bulwark against external adversaries and internal dissenters alike. Yet paradoxically, within their very loyalty lay the germ of distrust, a subtle and unsettling question. What if the individual to whom they rendered their most unconditional submission was not the pontiff arrayed in white, but rather the enigmatic figure clothed in black, whose power appeared to grow in the shadows? However, those apprehensions were a concern for posterity, for a future yet to unfold. In these nascent years, the Jesuits propagated with the irresistible velocity of a conflagration through parched terrain, both unstoppable and largely imperceptible in their silent, steady advance. Their compelling homilies resonated throughout ecclesiastical edifices, drawing multitudes. Their rigorous educational settings meticulously molded successive cohorts of students, instilling doctrine and discipline. Their intrepid evangelical endeavors traversed vast maritime expanses, and in every single undertaking, their pervasive ubiquity subtly conveyed a singular, undeniable reality. The pontiff had indeed discovered his formidable legion, and the global populace would soon experience its profound influence, reshaping the religious and political landscape. As darkness descends with serene tranquility upon Rome, within the venerable Vatican walls, the pontiff offers supplications in his immaculate white vestments, a beacon of visible authority. Yet, in a separate, more secluded chamber, the general of the Jesuits engages in devotion in his somber black attire, a figure of hidden power. The city's bells toll, their solemn reverberations interweaving. One figure publicly manifest, the other discreetly influential, both inexorably molding the trajectory of the Christian world, their destinies intertwined yet distinct. The Society of Jesus expanded with remarkable rapidity, their pervasive influence disseminating outward like concentric undulations across a water's surface, until secular monarchs and ecclesiastical prelates universally commenced to perceive the substantial impact of their authority, from distant courts to local dioceses. Yet, beyond their extensive network of evangelistic outposts and educational institutions, behind the myriad orators, spiritual advisors, and academics who served across continents, presided a singular individual. Their head, their supreme director, the one they simply designated as the superior general, the central nexus of their formidable organization. Distinct from other spiritual commanders of faith, he possessed no conventional military armaments, no grand palatial residence, nor any visible symbol of sovereignty or temporal power. His profound authority derived instead from meticulously penned directives conveyed across vast maritime distances, from discreet instructions transmitted sequentially from hand to hand, and from an uninterrupted continuum of submission extending from Rome to the most distant frontier. The pontiff might occupy his papal throne in immaculate white, venerated by the devout, a public figurehead. However, within the hierarchical structure of the Jesuit order, it was the superior general whose utterance carried the force of legal decree, whose directive possessed the formidable capacity to sway the volition of multitudes, shaping their actions and beliefs. He maintained an unostentatious existence within an unassuming dwelling in Rome, a life of apparent simplicity, yet his profound influence extended considerably beyond the opulent confines of the Vatican's marble halls. From those quiet, modest chambers, resolutions were formulated with the potential to reorient the pedagogical instruction of royal offspring in the French capital, the preparation of evangelists in the Portuguese colony of Goa, the destiny of an imperial tribunal in the Chinese capital of Beijing, and the delivery of homilies in Mexico. His correspondence exhibited both meticulous clarity and unequivocal authority, demanding no discussion, permitting no procrastination. And for the men who had solemnly vowed absolute submission, such directives were not mere suggestions, but rather the very essence of predetermined fate itself, immutable and unchallengeable. It is unsurprising, therefore, that speculative narratives began to flourish, weaving themselves into the fabric of European discourse. Murmurs circulated, describing the superior general as a quasi-pontiff in all but formal designation, an individual attired in somber hues rather than immaculate white. Some even asserted that his prerogatives contended with, and indeed superseded, those of the Holy Father himself. For while the pontiff was constrained by elaborate rituals, ecclesiastical synods, and global scrutiny, operating in the full light of day, the Jesuit general operated with stealth, unchronicled, unobserved, and yet commanded unquestioning and immediate compliance, his power all the more potent for its very discretion. To the reigning monarchs of the era, this prospect presented an profoundly unsettling thought. For what sovereign could truly find true repose, knowing that within the very confines of his royal court resided a Jesuit confessor, an individual who imparted counsel with hushed tones into regal ears, yet whose fundamental allegiance was pledged to a distant, commanding figure in Rome? The superior general possessed the formidable capacity, with merely a subtle articulation of a suggestion or directive, to subtly guide the moral compass of a ruler, and a conscience thus swayed held the potential to reorient the geopolitical trajectory or internal governance of an entire realm. Even within the venerable hierarchy of the Church itself, a current of unease rippled. Cardinals pondered the genuine autonomy of papal elections, questioning if conclaves were truly free of external manipulation when Jesuit minds exerted a formative influence upon the deliberations of numerous electors. Was there not, some among them inquired, an unseen force orchestrating results from concealed positions, a hidden hand guiding outcomes from the shadows? The appellation Black Pope was neither formally recognized nor publicly uttered within the hallowed precincts of the Vatican. Yet it nevertheless adhered to him with an almost tangible persistence, akin to an enigmatic mantle woven from threads of apprehension and intrigue. Black for the somber hue of his sacerdotal robes. Black for the clandestine nature of his formidable authority. Black for the unspoken, often imperceptible execution of his directives. To the devout faithful, he was perceived as the staunch protector of the pontiff, the vigilant custodian of the ecclesiastical body's most potent instrument. To his adversaries, he was a phantom sovereign, an ethereal monarch reigning from the obscuring depths of shadow. Moreover, the man himself scarcely ever presented himself to the public gaze. Unlike the supreme pontiff, who graced the crowds with his benediction, the superior general was virtually unseen, an entity whose designation was recognized, whose influence was palpable, yet whose physical form remained elusive. It was precisely this profound lack of public visibility that imbued him with an even greater aura of enigma, for authority that operates from concealed vantage points frequently appears more formidable than that which openly asserts itself, and the insinuation of clandestine manipulation invariably evokes a more profound sense of dread than any manifest reality. One might imagine Rome at dusk, the majestic Vatican dome radiating a warm, burnished hue against the encroaching twilight. Devout pilgrims reverently prostrate themselves in the vast piazza, their gazes directed upwards towards the pontiff, who extends his benediction from his elevated loggia. Yet, simultaneously, in a secluded chamber situated along a more unassuming thoroughfare, the Jesuit general makes no public gesture, articulates no pronouncements for the masses. Instead, his hand moves with unwavering composure, penning directives with meticulous precision, thereby delineating the trajectory of his religious order and, by extension, subtly influencing the overarching destiny of various global powers. As the venerable bells resonate across the ancient city, their sonorous peals appear to articulate a duality of authority, one voice for the pontiff, resplendent in white, another for the general, cloaked in black. Two formidable powers, intricately interwoven yet fundamentally separate, one manifest to the public eye, the other shrouded in obscurity. From this very dynamic interplay of overt and covert influence, the enduring mythos of the Black Pope commenced its deep entrenchment, a narrative destined to permeate and subtly disquiet subsequent generations. The nocturnal veil descends further. The solitary candle flickers, its flame dwindling. And in the profound shadows of Rome, the imposing yet unforthcoming presence of the superior general remains, his gravitas palpable, his formidable power unobserved, poised to subtly re-engineer the global landscape once again. Authority, when enveloped in an aura of reticence, invariably cultivates a rich tapestry of myth and folklore, and such was demonstrably the case with the Society of Jesus. Their solemn commitments, initially articulated upon the hallowed, unyielding stone of Montmartre, rapidly became the focal point of hushed conjectures and mounting anxieties, which intensified proportionally with the expansion of their societal footprint. Within the convivial atmospheres of public houses, amidst the refined settings of royal courts, and in the clandestine enclaves across the European continent, people quietly speculated about solemn pledges of such unwavering commitment and formidable rigor that they transcended mere declarations of intent, appearing instead as inexorable bonds meticulously fashioned in the deepest obscurity. The Jesuits themselves articulated with straightforward clarity the tenets of their solemn commitments, Their commitments to material renunciation, celibacy, unreserved submission, and that distinctively more incisive pledge of unwavering fealty to the Roman pontiff. Yet, the human faculty for conjecture frequently renders narratives with more ominous hues than factual reality. The clandestine nature of their rigorous instruction, the enigmatic character of their self-imposed regimen, and their unyielding adherence to directives that brooked no equivocation. All of it collectively fabricated an enveloping pall of apprehension around their religious fraternity. What precise solemnities, people wondered, were exchanged within the confines of private chambers, in sacrosanct spaces where only the silent masonry and the Almighty could bear witness. Conjecture circulated in hushed tones concerning arcane ceremonies performed within dimly illuminated, candle-flickering chambers. These accounts depicted figures clad in somber black vestments, prostrate before a crucifix, solemnly pledging to journey wherever dispatched, to execute every directive, even if such obedience necessitated the ultimate sacrifice of life. Certain narratives recounted chilling images of heated iron crosses indelibly marked upon the skin, of polished daggers glinting ominously adjacent to sacred altars, and of oaths exacting an unbreakable silence even amidst excruciating torment, along with an allegiance transcending personal moral judgment. Adversaries of the society disseminated inflammatory pamphlets, portraying the Jesuits as insidious plotters who had solemnly pledged to destabilize royal dynasties, to subjugate entire nations to their agenda, and to render absolute obedience to their superior general in Rome, even in defiance of their own reigning sovereigns. Did these pronouncements reflect an underlying reality, or were they merely the vocal manifestation of widespread apprehension? The annals of human events seldom offer such clear-cut distinctions. Yet, an undeniable certainty persists. The distinctive nature of the Jesuit vow of obedience stood unparalleled. Whereas members of other religious fraternities might engage in deliberative discourse, solicit external advice, or even permit their moral compass to flex under duress, the Jesuit was rigorously instructed that their submission must be absolute, instantaneous, and undertaken with an unwavering spirit of alacrity. Their conduct was to be devoid of any vacillation, embodying the principle, as articulated by Ignatius himself, of being a corpse in the hands of the order, utterly dead to self, alive solely to the imperative of command. Such profound declarations simultaneously evoked profound inspiration and considerable disquiet. To the devout, it represented the hallmark of consummate piety, a profound act of submission to divine providence that systematically divested the individual of personal arrogance and autonomous volition. To kings and princes, however, it was a source of considerably greater apprehension. Indeed, what sovereign could truly find tranquility while aware that an individual within his immediate retinue, perhaps a trusted Jesuit confessor, held his most profound allegiance not to the regal authority, but to a remote superior general residing in the eternal city? Thus, the solemn pledge became the very fabric of both profound admiration and profound distrust. Its detractors denounced it as an insidious compact, an unholy vow seemingly hammered from the elemental forces of fire and iron within the deepest obscurity. Conversely, its proponents lauded it as sacred, the zenith of spiritual and personal rigor. Yet a consensus emerged universally. No other form of submission extant in the world could rival the singular, unyielding obedience characteristic of the Jesuits. Imagine, if you will, a venerable stone sanctuary under the cloak of night. The atmosphere, crisp and cool, was redolent with the rich, pervasive aroma of liturgical incense. A cohort of men prostrate themselves, their elongated silhouettes undulating upon the cold flagstones. The nascent candlelight wavers, its delicate flames quivering as though acutely attuned to the solemnity of the moment. The sacred crucifix positioned above them emitted a subdued, golden luminescence. Sequentially, individual voices articulate with hushed yet resolute conviction, uttering declarations of profound self-abnegation, pronouncements that irrevocably determine destinies yet to unfold. The resonant reverberation of those sacred pledges endures long after the participants have departed, an indelible impress seemingly etched into the very fabric of the ancient masonry. In the centuries that followed, numerous polemical tracts and inflammatory pamphlets would amplify these narratives, fabricating elaborate accounts of gleaming blades, spilled sanguine, and malevolent, clandestine commitments. Nevertheless, even divested of such embellished fabrications, the intrinsic essence of the Jesuit vow retained a formidable clarity, an unreserved submission offered in profound quietude, devoid of any inquiry or challenge. Such an unyielding adherence to command rendered them, in the estimation of countless observers, the most meticulously organized and rigorously trained spiritual cohort the ecclesiastical institution had ever commanded. The nocturnal expanse seems to suspend its respiration. The solitary flames of the candles diminish further, their light barely perceptible. Within the profound stillness, the profound gravity of those solemn pledges appears to subtly resonate, as though hushed commitments perpetually infuse the atmosphere, much like lingering tendrils of smoke. These were vows imbued with the intensity of fire, the unyielding fortitude of iron, solemn agreements destined to propel the Society of Jesus to the remotest frontiers of the terrestrial sphere and to embed them inextricably within the very core of human chronology. Emerging from the profound quietude of their solemn commitments, the members of the Society of Jesus embarked upon the tumultuous stage of global affairs. The European continent merely represented the nascent phase of their expansive endeavors. Their mandate was unequivocally global in scope, and the pontiff's directive propelled them forth with the velocity and trajectory of arrows released from a taut bowstring, traversing vast oceanic expanses and arid desertscapes, penetrating dense tropical forests, and engaging with previously uncharted urban centers. These dedicated warriors of Christ, clad in their characteristic black vestments, bore with them their rigorous self-control, their scholarly texts, and their unwavering spiritual conviction. They were indefatigable itinerants. A number of them embarked upon maritime vessels from the bustling ports of Lisbon and Seville, their gazes intently focused upon distant horizons, where the vast expanse of ocean and firmament seamlessly converged into an infinite monochromatic vista. Conversely, others traversed formidable distances astride caravans, enduring the relentless assault of dust and wind, observing the distinctive standards of alien sovereignties gradually emerge on the distant landscape. To every locale where the appellation of Christ remained unheard, or where populations had consciously distanced themselves from the spiritual embrace of Rome, there the Jesuits were unequivocally dispatched. St. Francis Xavier emerged as their inaugural and most celebrated legendary persona, his extensive peregrinations so monumental in scope that they frequently bordered on the realm of epic myth rather than mere historical fact. Commencing his voyage from Portugal, he navigated eastward, making landfall in Goa, often lauded as the Pearl of India, before venturing further to Malacca, the distant shores of Japan, and the fabled, anticipated dominion of China. He administered the sacrament of baptism to innumerable converts, acquired proficiency in diverse languages alien to his native tongue, and composed epistles that radiated with an incandescent spiritual fervor. His demise upon a desolate isle, his gaze fixed across the expansive waters towards a Chinese empire he was destined never to attain, crystallized into an enduring emblem of Jesuit self-abnegation, representing a life wholly consecrated at the most remote periphery of the globe. Following in his wake, numerous other intrepid missionaries embarked on similar paths. Notably, Matteo Ricci, a profound scholar who veiled his intellect with an unassuming demeanor, successfully gained admittance to the illustrious Ming court in China. He adopted the vestments and comportment of a Confucian scholar, articulated insights with such sagacity that he garnered the profound esteem of the mandarins, and presented cartographic representations that fundamentally reconfigured the imperial understanding of global geography. His remarkable intellect functioned simultaneously as an intellectual conduit and a strategic instrument, seamlessly integrating the advancements of Western scientific inquiry with the venerable traditions of Eastern philosophical thought, thereby subtly implanting the nascent seeds of Christian faith in territories impervious to military subjugation. Deep within the verdant, impenetrable jungles of South America, the Jesuits established distinctive reductions, communal settlements where the indigenous Guarani people and the European missionaries coexisted harmoniously, integrating manual labor, spiritual devotion, and musical expression. For certain observers, these communities represented idyllic enclaves of profound religious conviction and egalitarian principles. Conversely, to others, they stood as direct affronts to the avarice of colonial powers, serving as protected sanctuaries that actively thwarted indigenous exploitation. The ethereal resonance of Guarani choirs performing sacred hymns beneath the sprawling, interwoven forest canopies evolved into one of the most singular and exquisitely melodious manifestations of cultural synthesis in the burgeoning New World. Throughout the vast expanse of the planet, the Jesuits indelibly imprinted their presence. Meticulous astronomical charts were produced in Beijing. Esteemed educational institutions flourished in Mexico City, and magnificent ecclesiastical structures ascended majestically along the littoral regions of India. They did not operate as military conquerors brandishing weaponry, yet their profound influence frequently penetrated more deeply and endured longer than any territorial subjugation. They assiduously acquired indigenous languages, meticulously rendered sacred texts into various vernaculars, engaged in profound dialectical exchanges with local philosophers, and imparted knowledge in disciplines such as mathematics, cartography, and musical theory. In each undertaking, they symbolically bore the standard of the Holy See. And in every distinct territory, their unwavering fealty served as an unbreakable tether, connecting them back to the distant authority of the superior general in the Eternal City. However, concomitant with such expansive global penetration, inevitably arose a pervasive undercurrent of distrust. Sovereigns who had initially embraced them as sagacious counselors occasionally developed an increasing apprehension regarding the true locus of their allegiance. Colonial entrepreneurs, whose primary motivation was financial gain, harbored deep resentment towards the Jesuits' steadfast advocacy for indigenous populations. Contending ecclesiastical figures harbored profound envy for their considerable sway. Consequently, in every bustling harbor, within every opulent court, and amidst every remote jungle mission, an unsettling, unspoken inquiry invariably persisted. Were these individuals genuinely dedicating themselves to the service of Christ? Or were they, in fact, clandestine operatives of an alternative agenda, instruments of a concealed dominion, governed by the enigmatic figure clad in black? Despite the myriad whispers and various unverified reports that frequently circulated, the sheer fortitude and unwavering bravery of the Jesuit order remained unequivocally undeniable. These intrepid men of faith fearlessly traversed into isolated leper colonies and cities utterly devastated by virulent plagues, places from which all other inhabitants had long since fled in terror. They embarked upon incredibly hazardous voyages across vast, tempestuous seas, fully cognizant that a grim death by ferocious storm, an insidious disease, or the ultimate sacrifice of martyrdom likely awaited them on distant, unknown shores. Their intellectual contributions were equally profound, as they meticulously compiled comprehensive dictionaries for indigenous languages that had, until then, existed solely in oral tradition, never before committed to written form. With an unwavering sense of purpose, they presented themselves before powerful kings in sumptuously gilded palaces and, with equal solemnity, stood before tribal communities in wide, untamed open fields, consistently embodying the same rigorous discipline, adhering to the same sacred vows, and carrying the same profound, yet understated, spiritual fervor. One might now vividly envision them, dispersed across the vast expanse of the continents, resembling countless luminous stars within a celestial constellation, far too immense for the human eye to fully encompass. Here, a Jesuit, clad in his distinctive black robes, stands with meticulous reverence before a formidable Japanese daimyo, offering a bow of profound, careful respect. Elsewhere, another kneels humbly within a simple forest hut, patiently instructing eager children to intone sacred hymns beneath the dappled shadow cast by towering palm trees. Still another paces thoughtfully in an opulent imperial court, meticulously unfurling intricate maps that strategically position Rome at the undisputed heart of the known world. Though perpetually distant from their European origins, these dedicated individuals remained inexorably bound to the silent yet absolute directives emanating from Rome. As twilight gradually descends, deepening its embrace across the vast, undulating oceans, the celestial tapestry of stars stretches out interminably, appearing identically above the ancient lands of Europe, the venerable empire of China, and the verdant, unexplored jungles of the New World. And under this universal canopy of starlight, the Jesuits continue their silent, indefatigable peregrinations, diligently conveying the essence of their profound mission to the very furthest reaches and remotest corners of the globe. With the Society of Jesus extending its reach across numerous continents, their sphere of influence began to permeate not merely remote villages and burgeoning missions, but also the most intimate and guarded chambers of Europe's royal courts. Their fundamental vocation, the guiding of individual souls towards spiritual salvation, soon saw the most influential and powerful personages across the continent lending their attentive ears to the sagacious counsel offered by the Jesuits. Consequently, these men in their distinctive black vestments ascended to the esteemed position of confessors to reigning kings and queens, figures who would kneel within luxuriously appointed, silk-draped chambers, privy to intimate whispers and profound secrets that no ordinary courtier, no battle-hardened general, nor even a trusted minister was ever permitted to overhear. Indeed, the role of a royal confessor bestowed upon its holder a peculiar and formidable authority. Concealed behind the impenetrable veil of absolute secrecy, monarchs would unburden their deepest selves, divulging a torrent of their transgressions, gnawing doubts, profound anxieties, and persistent temptations. In this sacred space, the Jesuit stood as a silent auditor, sworn to an inviolable oath of confidentiality, yet simultaneously tethered by an unyielding allegiance to his superior residing in Rome. The confessions of these rulers extended beyond mere carnal failings, encompassing weighty decisions of statecraft, the initiation of devastating wars, the intricate forging of strategic alliances, and the painful execution of political betrayals. Within this profoundly intimate exchange, the Jesuits' carefully chosen, softly spoken words possessed the astonishing capacity to subtly reorient the moral compass of a sovereign, and by extension, irrevocably alter the destiny of entire nations. Across the Iberian Peninsula, Jesuit confessors offered their sagacious counsel to the powerful Habsburg monarchs, those formidable emperors whose sprawling dominions extended from the heart of Europe to the newly discovered territories of the New World. They discreetly imparted advice to figures such as Philip II, a sovereign renowned for both his profound religiosity and his deep-seated suspicion, whose vast empire perpetually existed under the pervasive shadow of the dreaded Inquisition. In the opulent court of France, Jesuits evolved into indispensable advisors to the Bourbon kings, meticulously calibrating the intricate equilibrium between the temporal authority of the crown and the spiritual power of the altar. Even within the more precarious and volatile courts of Poland and Portugal, their persuasive voices found their way into the receptive ears of the reigning sovereigns, earnestly advocating for heightened piety, issuing stern warnings against the insidious spread of heresy, and skillfully orchestrating the delicate, often precarious interplay between the earthly throne and the eternal authority of Rome. This was an influence simultaneously characterized by its profound subtlety and its colossal magnitude, for indeed, what ordinary minister of state could ever address a king with the same unreserved candor and intimate familiarity as a confessor? What esteemed general could exert such a potent and direct pressure upon the very conscience of a monarch? Yet, crucially, this formidable influence was perpetually enshrouded in an impenetrable veil of silence. No individual outside the sacred encounter ever truly knew the precise words exchanged within the hallowed confines of the confessional. No one could ascertain the specific counsel provided, the particular penances imposed, or the grave warnings uttered in the hushed solemnity of private chapels and royal bedchambers. And it was precisely this profound secrecy that inevitably fostered and amplified widespread suspicion. Their detractors vociferously accused the Jesuits of artfully manipulating royal thrones, of subtly orchestrating events by pulling strings from behind the lavish velvet curtains of power. Numerous inflammatory pamphlets circulated widely, alleging that these priests were meticulously shaping state policy through the potent mechanism of whispered absolutions, effectively bending the will of sovereigns to align with the dictates of their superior general, disparagingly dubbed the Black Pope in Rome. Regardless of the veracity of these claims, The damaging accusation persisted tenaciously, for it is an immutable truth that profound secrecy invariably cultivates an environment ripe for fear and distrust. Paradoxically, despite the growing public suspicion, monarchs themselves frequently remained steadfastly devoted to their Jesuit confessors, profoundly appreciating their unwavering loyalty and rigorous discipline. In stark contrast to the numerous courtiers who constantly vied for personal power and material gain, the Jesuit possessed no wife, no ancestral estate, nor any earthly inheritance to pursue. His commitment was utterly absolute, his sagacious counsel meticulously sculpted by an ironclad adherence to his order's tenets, and his voice remained remarkably steady and calm even when the tumultuous world outside erupted in chaos. For rulers who bore the immense, crushing weight of their crowns, such steadfast stability often served as a profound source of solace and reassurance, even if its very nature also subtly disquieted them. Envision a scene within an opulent chamber at the magnificent Palace of Versailles, or the austere grandeur of El Escorial. Gilded ceilings gleam softly, while resplendent chandeliers cast a warm, flickering glow from countless candles. In distant, adjacent rooms, courtiers engage in hushed, conspiratorial whispers. Yet here, sequestered within a heavily curtained alcove, the king himself kneels, softly articulating his transgressions and moral dilemmas into the attentive ear of a man clad solely in somber black. The Jesuit listens with an imperturbable countenance, his own words measured and sparse. Nevertheless, the profound resonance of this private exchange possesses the potential to reverberate powerfully, shaping the course of international treaties, igniting or quelling devastating wars, and altering the very trajectory of royal dynasties. While the Supreme Pontiff in Rome continued to preside, majestically enthroned in white vestments and revered by the adoring masses of Christendom, it was within these secluded royal chambers that the Jesuit confessor subtly molded the very heart of monarchs, intimately engaged with the conscience of sovereigns, and held, in profound silence, the extraordinary power to subtly influence the direction of vast empires. And behind this intricate network of influence, much like a pervasive shadow projected from a distant source, stood the superior general of the Society of Jesus, ominously referred to as the Black Pope, diligently receiving reports and issuing directives, his unseen, guiding hand, perhaps subtly influencing even the most intimate, whispered exchanges between a king and his spiritual advisor. As the night invariably deepens and the flickering candles burn ever lower within the sumptuous gilded courts, the external world may continue its boisterous activity. Yet, within the sacred confines of the chamber, a profound silence descends, and in that pregnant stillness, the quiet, almost inaudible whisper of a Jesuit confessor to a king might well constitute the most delicate and ethereal sound imaginable. Yet paradoxically, it also harbored the most potent and perilous implications. The very intimacy and privileged access that rendered Jesuit confessors utterly indispensable to monarchs simultaneously cast a protracted, disquieting shadow across the illustrious royal courts of Europe. For while sovereigns deeply valued and relied upon their sagacious counsel, the entrenched ministers and powerful nobles frequently regarded the Jesuits with profound suspicion and wary apprehension, who, indeed, could possibly contend with such an extraordinary degree of influence, an authority not acquired through the might of armies or the accumulation of vast treasures, but rather through the impenetrable, secret chambers of the royal conscience. To a significant number of observers, these black-robed priests appeared less as devout, humble servants of Christ, and more as clandestine architects, subtly shaping the very structures of power. Within the intricate political landscape of France, this pervasive unease rapidly intensified and sharpened. The formidable Bourbon dynasty had come to rely extensively upon its Jesuit confessors for spiritual and often temporal guidance. However, a growing chorus of whispers began to circulate amongst the disgruntled nobility and rival factions of the clergy, alleging that these men were, in fact, clandestinely directing state policy from behind the plush velvet curtains of the magnificent Palace of Versailles. Incendiary pamphlets, teeming with accusations, were widely disseminated throughout the bustling streets of Paris, portraying the Jesuits as cunning schemers whose ultimate loyalty was pledged not to the French crown, but to a shadowy, omnipotent figure in Rome, their superior general, pejoratively labeled the Black Pope. Each insidious rumor, every pointed accusation, relentlessly stoked a simmering public fear that the authentic will of the reigning monarchs was not truly their own, but rather subtly implanted into their ears by unseen, manipulative lips. The Kingdom of Spain, too, experienced a palpable tremor of burgeoning suspicion. The devout Habsburg emperors, renowned for their profound adherence to the Catholic faith, were widely believed to be subtly aligning their political decisions with the nuanced guidance provided by their Jesuit confessors. Whispers permeated the court, suggesting that the vast global empire of Spain was not solely directed by the sovereign himself, but rather by the confessor who was privy to the monarch's most guarded secrets. Furthermore, in the distant kingdom of Portugal, a comparable sentiment of profound distrust began to take firm root. Both the powerful nobility and the influential bishops issued stark warnings that the Jesuits were meticulously weaving webs of influence that were deemed far too intricate, excessively perilous, and disturbingly deeply embedded within the very fabric of royal bloodlines. Periodically, the mounting tension would inevitably escalate and erupt into overt conflict. Competing factions within the various royal courts actively conspired to marginalize the Jesuits, to forcibly remove them from their privileged positions within the royal chambers. Moreover, whenever a significant tragedy befell the nation, be it a devastating failed harvest, a humiliating war lost, or even the shocking assassination of a monarch, the blame frequently and almost reflexively converged upon the Jesuits, as if their very presence somehow carried an insidious curse. To their numerous adversaries, the Jesuits were perceived not as benign guardians of the royal conscience, but rather as cunning puppeteers, surreptitiously controlling the very threads of national destiny. Nevertheless, even amidst this raging tempest of widespread suspicion, monarchs frequently demonstrated a steadfast unwillingness to relinquish their Jesuit confessors. This tenacity stemmed from the unique offerings of the Jesuit, a voice uncorrupted by the allure of material wealth, an ear perpetually bound by an unbreakable vow of silence, and an unwavering loyalty that transcended the capricious, shifting currents of political expediency. For rulers burdened by the immense and isolating weight of their crowns, such steadfast and disinterested counsel proved exceedingly difficult to forego. Despite this royal endorsement, the insidious accusations against the Society of Jesus continued to fester and proliferate. Within contemporary paintings and biting satirical prints, Jesuits were frequently depicted with sinister dark wings, often shown crouching surreptitiously behind royal thrones, malevolently whispering insidious poison into the receptive ears of unsuspecting kings. Their formidable and often maligned reputation thus burgeoned not merely from verifiable facts, but perhaps even more profoundly from a deep-seated, pervasive fear. This was a primal fear of that which remained perpetually unseen, of clandestine conversations forever obscured behind impenetrable veils of profound secrecy. Imagine a lavish banquet unfolding within a magnificent royal palace. Resplendent golden plates shimmer under the light. Melodious music gracefully drifts through the exquisitely gilded halls, and courtiers, adorned in elaborate jeweled masks, engage in light-hearted laughter. Yet beneath this veneer of festive revelry, a subtle undercurrent of unease persists. At the distant extremity of the grand hall, a Jesuit moves with an almost imperceptible quietude, walking discreetly at the side of his king. He utters no word, nor does he assert any claim to a seat at the opulent table. And yet, when the multitude of candles are finally extinguished and the last of the revelers have departed, it is this same man who will kneel in solemn intimacy beside the sovereign, there to receive the most profound and vulnerable confessions of the royal heart. For some observers, that particular sight offered a profound sense of reassurance and spiritual comfort. For others, however, it evoked an unsettling, even terrifying, apprehension. For within the hushed, deeply private exchange between the priest and the king, the distinct boundary separating the earthly throne of man from the sacred, divine throne of God appeared to subtly, yet significantly, blur. And in the unsettling ambiguity of that blurred demarcation, public suspicion only intensified further. As the inexorable march of centuries progressed, these metaphorical shadows cast by the Society of Jesus grew ever longer and more pervasive. The Jesuits had, by degrees, maneuvered themselves directly into the very epicenters of political power. Yet, with each calculated step, they took further into the corridors of influence. They inevitably attracted more scrutinizing eyes, provoked more challenging questions, and ignited more profound fears. Consequently, within the hushed, ornate corridors of countless palaces, an insidious suspicion clung to them with the tenacity of lingering incense, an aroma at once subtly sweet, profoundly heavy, and ultimately impossible to completely dissipate or clear. The night now gently softens, as if the very world itself were exhaling a collective sigh of profound unease. And in that ensuing quietude, one can almost discern the faint, lingering echo of those royal courts of ages past, an echo of suspicion swirling perpetually like hushed whispers through dimly lit, candlelit halls, and of the Jesuits themselves, moving with an almost spectral silence, perpetually existing in a state where they were never entirely trusted, yet paradoxically, never completely disregarded or dismissed. The appellation itself was never intended to acquire any official recognition or formal endorsement. It was certainly not codified within the solemn pronouncements of canon law, nor was it meticulously carved into the venerable marble of the Vatican's hallowed halls. And yet, despite its unofficial status, the name persisted with tenacious stubbornness, whispered furtively in hushed corridors, muttered conspiratorially in bustling taverns, and boldly emblazoned in the pages of forbidden pamphlets. This singular, enduring epithet clung inextricably to the Superior General of the Society of Jesus, the chilling moniker of the Black Pope. It was not merely his somber vestments that set him apart. While all members of the Society of Jesus donned black cassocks, creating a stark contrast to the shimmering gold of episcopal attire and the pristine white robes of the papacy, the superior general presented a figure who appeared to challenge the very authority of the pontiff himself. Where the venerated white pope governed from the sacred throne of Peter, his presence overtly visible and steeped in ceremony, the enigmatic black pope commanded the unwavering loyalty of an unseen legion. His formidable influence was not heralded by grand liturgical processions, but rather conveyed through missives sealed with wax, encrypted dispatches traversing national boundaries, and hushed directives discreetly imparted within the sanctity of confessionals and the quiet learning environments of classrooms. From the very genesis of their order, the Jesuits pledged an extraordinary dual allegiance, not solely to the Roman pontiff, but also to their superior general, whose pronouncements held the irrevocable force of law. This pervasive authority reached across sprawling continents, extending its grasp to dedicated missionaries laboring in distant China, trusted confessors serving in the sophisticated salons of Paris, and intrepid explorers navigating the untamed wilderness of Brazil. It was widely whispered that with a single decisive order, the Black Pope possessed the capacity to redirect the destinies of entire monarchies, for his devoted adherents occupied positions of intimate proximity to both sovereigns and high-ranking cardinals. The mystique surrounding this figure grew even more ominous as adversaries of the Jesuit order began to disseminate unsettling narratives concerning their sacred vows. Some detractors asserted that the Jesuit pledge of obedience was so absolute, so unyielding, that the superior general could command an individual to embark on perilous transoceanic journeys, to subtly infiltrate royal courts, or even to embrace a silent martyrdom for the society's objectives, confident that the command would be executed without the slightest hesitation or query. Others vehemently maintained that the Black Pope was, in fact, a master strategist of conspiracy, secretly orchestrating assassinations, instigating political upheavals, and meticulously crafting intricate webs of intrigue to consolidate his order's pervasive dominion. The actual circumstances were undoubtedly more intricate, imbued with greater subtlety, yet the compelling legend firmly took root. Within clandestinely distributed pamphlets circulated throughout Protestant Europe, chilling woodcuts vividly portrayed a dark-robed pontiff lurking in the shadows behind the papal throne, his hand subtly resting upon the white pope's shoulder, guiding him as if he were a mere marionette. In these sensationalized accounts, the venerable city of Rome was depicted as being governed not by the legitimate successor of St. Peter, but by a shadowy general who whispered his clandestine commands through the impenetrable veil of absolute obedience. And yet, within the very heart of Rome, the Black Pope resided not within the opulence of gilded palaces, but in unpretentious chambers situated near the Gesu, which served as the venerable mother church of the Jesuits. His personal quarters were markedly austere, a simple desk laden with a profusion of correspondence, a solitary crucifix adorning the wall, and a well-worn chair where he received his visitors. Nevertheless, from this unassuming sanctuary, a torrent of directives emanated, flowing outwards in every conceivable direction, much like mighty rivers originating from a singular, powerful spring. One might envision him there at the break of dawn, the morning air still crisp with the lingering coolness of the night. A solitary candle flickers dimly, its molten wax slowly dripping onto the aged wooden surface of his desk. Before him lie an array of letters, dispatched from the far reaches of Asia, the sprawling Americas, and the ancient lands of Europe, penned in the meticulous, sometimes spidery, script of tireless missionaries, insightful confessors, and erudite professors. He peruses accounts of spiritual conversions and disheartening setbacks, of sovereigns whose allegiances waver precariously towards heresy, and of daring explorers charting uncharted rivers that might, in due course, serve as conduits for the onward march of the Christian faith. He pauses, then meticulously crafts his responses in precise, eloquent Latin. His carefully chosen words carry the weight of both profound blessing and unequivocal command. Each letter, once sealed, transforms into a vital thread woven into the expansive, intricate, and largely unseen tapestry of Jesuit influence. Such profound authority, however, was not universally embraced. Popes themselves occasionally exhibited a palpable irritation at the notion that another individual could command such fervent devotion. Monarchs, in hushed tones of frustration, expressed their disquiet that their Jesuit confessors pledged their primary obedience not to their sovereign, but to a distant general residing in Rome. And it was precisely within this simmering tension that the mystique surrounding the Black Pope only intensified, growing deeper and more formidable. By the advent of the 17th century, the appellation Black Pope had become almost ubiquitous, uttered sometimes with profound reverence, but more often with palpable apprehension. To some, the Black Pope was perceived as the unwavering guardian of orthodox doctrine, the unyielding steel backbone of the Catholic Church, standing resolute against the encroaching tides of Protestantism and paganism. To others, he was depicted as the clandestine architect behind elaborate plots and ruthless purges, a shadowy figure whose formidable power seemed to overshadow that of the Holy Father himself. And so, the world began to articulate the existence of two distinct popes: the White Pope, resplendent in gold and bathed in the radiant light of public veneration, and the Black Pope, cloaked in shadow and wielding the silent power of command. Together, they appeared to constitute a dual axis of profound authority, one overtly manifest, the other subtly concealed, yet both considered indispensable to the very fabric and direction of Christendom. The enduring myth was far more than a mere designation. It embodied a profound, unsettling question that reverberated through the opulent halls of palaces and the solemn chambers of parliaments alike. Who truly held the reins of power in Rome? The Jesuits had initially infiltrated the royal courts of Europe with minimal ostentation, their unassuming cassocks seamlessly merging into the hushed shadows of private chapels and antechambers. Yet, remarkably, within the span of a single generation, they had become utterly indispensable to the reigning monarchs. They functioned as trusted confessors, esteemed educators, and sagacious advisors. They meticulously tutored the scions of princely houses, whispered strategic counsel into the ears of queens, and sat with quiet discernment in the hallowed council chambers, perpetually listening, absorbing vital information, and patiently awaiting opportune moments. Kings greatly esteemed their acute intelligence, their profound erudition, and their remarkable capacity for persuasion. However, with each whispered confession and every dispatch meticulously sealed and sent to Rome, a subtle yet persistent sense of unease began to insidiously grow. One might vividly picture the opulent, gilded court of France, where the soft glow of myriad candles flickered within elaborate crystal chandeliers. The king, in a moment of spiritual introspection, kneels in his private chapel, murmuring his transgressions into the attentive ear of his Jesuit confessor. Yet the monarch cannot suppress a gnawing uncertainty. Does this man truly serve him? Or does his ultimate allegiance lie with another, more distant authority? The unspoken answer remained consistently the same. The Jesuits' fealty was owed first to the Church, and subsequently, directly to the superior general. The Black Pope's formidable authority stretched forth like invisible chains, inexorably binding the conscience of kings to a figure they had never personally encountered. In the royal court of Spain, a similar undercurrent of tension visibly bristled. Jesuits meticulously educated the heirs of the venerable Habsburg lineage, subtly molding the minds that were destined to govern sprawling empires. They proffered counsel not as obsequious flatterers, but as individuals who appeared to wield profound knowledge of history, philosophy, and theology with the precision of strategic weaponry. They deftly guided monarchs towards specific policy decisions, while meticulously maintaining an outward appearance of humble servitude. To a discerning king, engaging with such counselors was akin to participating in a complex game of chess against an adversary who already possessed foreknowledge of the final decisive move. Not every sovereign, however, proved willing to tolerate this pervasive influence. Elizabeth I of England, for instance, regarded Jesuits as clandestine daggers poised in the dark, deeming their divided loyalty profoundly perilous within a kingdom that had embraced Protestantism. She unequivocally branded them as traitors, as insidious agents of Rome cunningly cloaked in the sacred vestments of priests. Her ministers, in hushed and anxious tones, spoke of potential assassins, elaborate conspiracies, and insidious plots aimed at destabilizing her throne. Across the breadth of Protestant Europe, inflammatory pamphlets depicted Jesuits as venomous serpents, subtly slithering into unsuspecting courts, their black robes trailing behind them like ominous shadows of impending death. Even within staunchly Catholic realms, a deep-seated suspicion began to fester. France, Spain, and Portugal, each in their own time, would eventually resort to expelling the Jesuits, not due to any perceived lack of religious devotion, but because their reigning monarchs harbored a profound fear of being covertly governed from behind the mysterious veil of their order's influence. How, indeed, could a king truly place his trust in a counselor whose very soul was pledged to another unseen master? The mounting tension reached a critical juncture during periods of intense, often violent, accusation. When Henry IV of France tragically fell victim to assassination in 1610, whispers of Jesuit involvement spread with the speed and ferocity of a wildfire. Although no Jesuit blade actually struck the monarch, persistent rumors insisted that their subtle counsel had, in some way, paved the path for the regicide. When various conspiracies simmered and erupted in England, Jesuit names were frequently inscribed in ink across indictments, irrespective of their actual culpability. And each successive rumor served only to further solidify the pervasive myth that the Black Pope's formidable reach extended not merely into the inner sanctums of royal courts, but deep into the very bloodstream of political power itself. The Jesuits naturally, vociferously denied such grave charges. They consistently preached unwavering loyalty, not insidious subversion. They diligently offered their extensive network of knowledge and influence to serve both the crown and the church. And yet, the underlying fear stubbornly persisted. For rulers who had historically commanded vast armies and wielded tangible power, it proved profoundly unsettling to confront an perceived adversary that waged its battles with the subtle yet potent instruments of schools, pulpits, and the silent, intimate confessions of the faithful. One might vividly envision the private chambers of Versailles. Behind shimmering silk draperies, Louis XIV, the Sun King, engages in a confidential conference with his Jesuit confessor. The monarch, whose boundless authority stretched across Europe like the very rays of the sun, found himself, on occasion, deferring to the gentle yet unyielding guidance of a man clad in a simple black robe. Despite all his magnificent pomp and absolute power, the king's conscience was not entirely his own domain, and he was acutely aware of this vulnerability. Thus, the legend deepened, asserting that the Black Pope, operating through his vast and silent network of confessors, wielded a power over kings that far surpassed anything achievable by mere crowns or swords. Monarchs commanded armies, Jesuits, however, commanded souls, and in that invisible, spiritual battlefield, kings discovered themselves profoundly vulnerable, susceptible to hushed whispers and subtle guidance that extended far beyond the confines of their earthly thrones. By the 17th century, this pervasive fear had become ubiquitous. In the grand dining halls and rustic hunting lodges, within the solemn chambers of parliaments and the opulent corridors of palaces, men murmured the same anxious query. If the Jesuits pledge their ultimate fealty to the Black Pope above all others, then who truly holds dominion over the rulers of Christendom? The prevailing sentiment began to shift, initially with hushed murmurs, then escalating into unequivocal proclamations. By the mid-17th century, the Jesuits, who had once been enthusiastically welcomed into royal courts and kingdoms as fervent saviors of the Catholic faith, found themselves increasingly cast out and condemned as insidious enemies in disguise. Their collective strength had grown too conspicuously visible. Their network of schools had multiplied exponentially. Their confessors whispered too intimately close to the very epicenters of power, and their unswerving loyalty to the enigmatic Black Pope disquieted even the most devout Catholic monarchs. The fundamental issue was no longer merely a question of their dedicated service, but rather of their formidable and ever-expanding reach. In Portugal, the royal court took the decisive first step. The Jesuits had played an instrumental role in facilitating the expansion of Portugal's vast colonial empire, expertly guiding missionaries to distant lands in Brazil, across Africa, and throughout Asia. Yet, their remarkable success came with an unforeseen cost. The Crown discovered, to its dismay, that Jesuit missions occasionally operated more as autonomous, self-governing entities than as mere colonial outposts subservient to Lisbon. In Brazil, for instance, the Jesuits courageously shielded indigenous populations from the brutal realities of enslavement, steadfastly insisting that these were children of God, not mere commodities for imperial exploitation. For the avaricious settlers desperately seeking labor, this stance was utterly intolerable. For the distant government in Lisbon, it amounted to rebellion in everything but official declaration. Consequently, the Crown formally declared the Jesuits subversive, and in the stark, unfeeling language of royal decrees, their banishment was unequivocally ordered. Following Lisbon's decisive example, a wave of suspicion began to proliferate across Europe. In France, the powerful Parliament of Paris meticulously observed the Jesuits' burgeoning influence with growing apprehension. Numerous pamphlets began to circulate, openly accusing the society of actively fostering sedition and of meticulously cultivating conspiracies within the intimate confines of confessionals. Their vocal critics vehemently asserted that the Jesuits sought to manipulate and bend the French monarchy to conform to the ultimate will of Rome. Although powerful kings like Louis XIV continued for a time to employ Jesuit confessors, the insidious seeds of doubt had been irrevocably sown. In the ancient city of Venice, the decree of expulsion descended with sudden and startling force. The Republic, fiercely protective of its own sovereignty and renowned for its independent spirit, perceived the Society of Jesus as an intrusive entity, meddling in matters deemed sacrosanct to the state. Their unwavering allegiance to the shadowy figure known as the Black Pope stood in stark contrast to the Venetians' deep-seated pride and autonomy. Thus, in the pivotal year of 1606, when Venice found itself embroiled in a tense diplomatic confrontation with Pope Paul V, a definitive command was issued. The Jesuits were to vacate the serene lagoons. Their departure was imbued with a profound sense of bitterness and resentment. Boats laden with somber-faced priests and their precious scholarly tomes glided silently through the mist-shrouded canals. Their mission abruptly abandoned, not due to any theological deviation, but rather as a direct consequence of convoluted political maneuvering. This unsettling pattern of rejection and exile, born of suspicion and fear, was destined to replicate itself across the diverse political landscapes of Europe. Monarchs governing vast kingdoms, parliaments wielding legislative power, powerful dukes presiding over their territories, and independent republics alike, each harbored a profound apprehension towards an organization they perceived as beyond their direct purview and control. The stated reasons for these expulsions were multifaceted. Occasionally, they were rooted in theological differences, meticulously cloaked in impassioned sermons that denounced dangerous doctrines and heterodox teachings. At other times, the motivations were distinctly economic, as influential merchants and wealthy landowners seethed with indignation over the Jesuits. Zealous advocacy for the rights and welfare of indigenous populations in overseas colonies, which often interfered with their own exploitative enterprises. Yet, most frequently, the underlying causes were unequivocally political. No sovereign ruler could tolerate the existence of an extensive network of highly disciplined men whose ultimate loyalty was sworn to an unseen, foreign master. And yet, with an almost uncanny persistence, each attempt at banishment appeared ultimately to falter. Like elusive specters, the Jesuits invariably re-emerged from the shadows, their presence felt once more, where one royal court had forcefully cast them out. Another, perhaps more desperate for their intellectual or spiritual influence, extended an inviting hand. The dismantling of a mission in one locale merely presaged the blossoming of a new, vibrant enterprise in a distant, unforeseen land. Their enforced absence from the canals of Venice, for instance, did not in the least diminish their burgeoning influence within the burgeoning Kingdom of Poland. Similarly, their abrupt exile from the Iberian shores of Portugal failed to extinguish their formidable strength and evangelical zeal in the far-flung territories of Asia. With an almost supernatural ability to adapt and endure, They seemed as impossible to truly contain as water slipping ungraspably through open fingers. However, these repeated prescriptions inadvertently achieved another, perhaps more insidious outcome. They vigorously nourished the burgeoning myth surrounding the society. Among the common populace of Europe, whispers began to proliferate and intensify. If powerful kings and queens truly feared these priests, then surely they must possess a power far exceeding that of mere monarchs. If entire nations felt compelled to cast them out, it could only be because the Jesuits had unearthed or touched upon secrets so profound and perilous that no earthly ruler dared to confront them. The previously clear image of the Jesuit as a simple, pious priest began to blur, morphing into something far darker, something undeniably more dangerous and enigmatic. And at the very heart of this escalating mystique loomed the perpetually unseen yet omnipresent hand of the Black Pope, subtly guiding, meticulously correcting, and patiently waiting in the depths of the shadows. One might easily picture a chilling, moonless night in Lisbon, its cobbled streets illuminated by the flickering, unsteady glow of countless torches. Along these thoroughfares, black-robed Jesuits marched in solemn, unbroken silence towards the bustling docks. Citizens lined the routes, their faces etched with a mixture of uneasy quietude, some openly weeping at the departure of their spiritual guides, while others, fueled by suspicion and resentment, spat bitter curses. The ships, their lanterns casting an ephemeral glow against the dark, swelling waves, slowly pulled away from the shore, carrying these men who had, in their time, profoundly shaped both sprawling empires and the intimate confessions of countless souls. Yet, as their sails gradually diminished, then ultimately vanished into the inky vastness of the Atlantic horizon, many onlookers intuitively understood that this was not an ending. Rather, it was merely the ominous precursor to a far greater tempest. For with each successive banishment, the Jesuits seemed to return with renewed vigor and an even deeper, more entrenched influence. And with every such return, the legend of their hidden, almost supernatural power deepened further, until even the most pragmatic monarchs began to question whether exile was ever truly a definitive expulsion, or if the omniscient Black Pope had simply receded into yet another shadow, patiently biding his time for the opportune moment to re-emerge. By the advent of the 18th century, the Society of Jesus no longer resided solely in the bright, unambiguous daylight of public devotion and academic pursuit. They had, instead, subtly slipped into the murky, ambiguous twilight of pervasive rumor and insinuation. Across the length and breadth of Europe, an army of pamphleteers and fiery preachers began to speak of them, not merely as esteemed teachers and compassionate confessors, but as shadowy puppeteers, meticulously manipulating hidden strings that governed the affairs of state and society. The very name Jesuit began to acquire a heavy, almost palpable weight of suspicion. Whispered furtively in the bustling markets and sophisticated salons, emblazoned upon anonymous broadsheets that circulated clandestinely, passed from hand to hand like some forbidden heretical scripture. The accusations leveled against them were as diverse as they were profoundly ominous. Some fiercely contended that the Jesuits were the masterminds behind intricate plots to assassinate reigning kings. Others vehemently accused them of clandestinely guiding revolutionary movements, of embedding secret codes within their dense theological treatises, and of exploiting the sacred confessional not for the absolution of sins, but as a sophisticated conduit for gathering intelligence. There were those who adamantly insisted that the society's intricate network stretched into every conceivable corner of Europe and far beyond, an invisible, ubiquitous empire that dared to rival the established monarchies themselves. In the intellectual heart of Paris, the city's numerous coffee houses swiftly transformed into veritable hotbeds of fervent speculation and conspiratorial discourse. The leading philosophers of the Enlightenment, who inherently distrusted all forms of clerical authority, singled out the Jesuits as the most perilous and Machiavellian of all religious orders. Voltaire, with his characteristic sneer, derided their perceived cunning and manipulative tactics, while others openly labeled them as the insidious architects of tyranny, cunningly cloaked in the guise of piety. For these ardent skeptics, the enigmatic figure of the Black Pope became a potent symbol of everything they despised, an unseen, clandestine sovereign, clad not in the traditional purple robes of ecclesiastical power, but in the stark black of mystery, issuing his commands from the deepest, most impenetrable shadows. These pervasive conspiracy stories, far from being debunked, thrived voraciously on the society's own ingrained culture of secrecy. Their notoriously strict discipline, their binding oaths of unquestioning obedience, and their insular, closed houses of study, all served as potent fuel for imaginations already aflame with suspicion. Tales circulated widely that they had infiltrated the royal courts of Europe to such an astonishing depth that virtually no significant decision of state could be made without their subtle, whispered influence. Some brazenly claimed they exerted covert control over the vast flows of wealth, discreetly directing powerful banks and influential merchants through a clandestine network of coded letters. Others swore, with fervent conviction, that they possessed ancient, meticulously charted maps, revealing routes to untold hidden treasures in the New World, treasures deliberately withheld from reigning kings for their own nefarious designs. Even in the distant, exotic lands of the Americas, their renowned reductions, those meticulously constructed settlements designed for the spiritual and social welfare of indigenous converts, were maliciously painted by their enemies as impregnable fortresses. Critics adamantly insisted that the Jesuits were systematically stockpiling vast quantities of wealth and secretly training formidable armies, all in preparation to carve out a sovereign kingdom of their own, nestled strategically between the dense forests and mighty rivers, while the unvarnished truth of these settlements was undeniably far more intricate and benign. The compelling myth of Jesuit priests, armed with profound knowledge and defending secret realms from both native and European rulers alike, proved utterly irresistible to the fearful public imagination. Even from within the hallowed confines of the Church itself, a deep-seated suspicion began to fester and spread. Cardinals, in hushed tones, muttered darkly of Jesuit plots unfolding within sacred conclaves, of their quiet, insidious influence on the outcomes of papal elections. Did the elusive Black Pope, though physically seated in Rome, yet ostensibly outside the visible papal throne, wield a veto more potent and decisive than the collective vote of the cardinals themselves? Some devoutly swore it was so. In the solemn silence of locked chapels, priests exchanged furtive whispers of Jesuits, subtly steering the very soul of Catholicism towards hidden, unrevealed ends, far removed from the declared will of God. The enduring power of conspiracy, it became increasingly clear, resided not in its ability to present irrefutable proof, but rather in its sheer, relentless persistence. Every banishment, every public controversy, every sudden and unexpected rise of a Jesuit to a position of prominence served only to confirm and deepen the ingrained suspicions of their critics. Were they not, after all, expelled from powerful kingdoms precisely because they had audaciously overreached their bounds? And if they inevitably returned, was it not undeniable proof that their unseen hand still reached deeply into the most guarded corridors of power? Picture, if one will, a dimly candlelit salon in the opulent city of Vienna, where aristocratic ladies and gentlemen recline languidly in plush velvet chairs, as a newly printed pamphlet is read aloud by a servant. The words accuse the Jesuits of a grand, audacious plot to clandestinely place their own chosen candidate upon every single throne in Europe. Some among the distinguished company might offer a polite, dismissive chuckle at the sheer absurdity of such a notion. Yet none among them could entirely dismiss the unsettling possibility. In the profound silence that inevitably followed the fading laughter, a single unsettling question lingered persistently in the mind of each guest. What if, by some terrifying chance, it were true? For as the night deepened across the vast continent, one truth grew with chilling clarity. Whether truly innocent or unequivocally guilty, the Jesuits had become inextricably linked with the very idea of conspiracy, and the Black Pope, though never once glimpsed by the common eye, loomed larger and more formidable than any king or pontiff in the collective imagination of Europe. A spectral figure whose very existence was a profound, dark, and utterly unanswerable question mark. By the mid-18th century, the once faint whispers had swelled into something far more tangible and dangerously potent than mere rumor. Kings and queens, who had for generations relied heavily upon Jesuit confessors and trusted advisors, now began to perceive in them not loyal, devoted servants, but formidable rivals to be profoundly feared. The powerful Bourbon monarchs of Spain, France, and Portugal, their trust irrevocably shattered, no longer harbored any faith in the society of Jesus. One by one, with grim determination, they moved to sever the order from their realms, much like excising a limb infected with a hidden, insidious poison. In Lisbon, under the ruthless administration of the Marquis of Pombal, the Jesuits were publicly accused of inciting rebellion in the distant, sprawling territories of Brazil and of conspiring directly against the Portuguese crown. Their prestigious colleges were summarily shuttered, their invaluable libraries confiscated, and their priests brutally dragged from their pulpits. In Madrid, King Charles III, acting with chilling precision, issued secret decrees in the dead of night, his soldiers storming Jesuit houses while the unsuspecting city slept. Priests were rudely awakened by the harsh glare of torchlight, afforded no opportunity whatsoever to defend themselves, and marched away in an eerie, enforced silence. Across the vast French kingdom, Louis XV, yielding to the relentless pressure of his influential ministers, likewise banished them, despite the profound loyalty the society had once demonstrated towards him. The Society of Jesus, an organization that had wielded such immense power and influence only a few decades prior, now appeared to vanish almost entirely overnight. Ships laden with entire communities of exiled Jesuits ferried them into distant papal lands, to the rugged shores of Corsica, and to the far-flung edges of the empire where they could, it was hoped, be quietly forgotten. Their once bustling schools stood desolate and empty, their hallowed chapels abandoned, and their names were mercilessly dragged through the mud of vitriolic political pamphlets. And then, in a final devastating blow, came the decree that irrevocably sealed their fate. In the year 1773, Pope Clement XIV, bowing under immense and sustained pressure from the powerful European monarchs, issued a papal bull that formally and completely dissolved the society itself. The symbolic Black Pope's chair stood conspicuously empty. The order's venerable seal was ceremonially broken. In the heart of Rome, their magnificent church of the Gesù remained a grand architectural testament, but the men who had once filled its pews with their devotion were now scattered to the four winds. Some wept openly in despair. Some disappeared quietly into the obscurity of parish work. Others, with unwavering conviction, continued their teaching and scholarship in deepest secrecy. For a fleeting period, it truly seemed as though the Jesuits had been utterly erased, not merely from the corridors of power, but from the very annals of collective memory. Yet, as history often demonstrates, silence does not invariably signify death. In hidden corners, the indomitable spirit of the order subtly lingered. Some Jesuits, against all odds, continued their vital work in Imperial Russia, where the formidable Catherine the Great defiantly refused to enforce the papal ban. Others meticulously carried on their scholarship in quiet, clandestine ways, diligently keeping alive the rigorous methods and profound teachings that had once so profoundly shaken empires, and always, in the minds of those who harbored an enduring fear of them, the compelling enigmatic story of the Black Pope simply refused to conclude. If anything, the very act of suppression only served to deepen and enrich the myth surrounding the Jesuits. For what could possibly be more suspicious or more intriguing than an order deemed too powerful and influential for even mighty monarchs to tolerate, and too secretive and elusive for even a reigning pope to effectively contain? Their exile was thus not interpreted as a definitive defeat, but rather as a chilling confirmation that somewhere, in profound silence, they were merely waiting, biding their time for the opportune moment to re-emerge. One might vividly envision Rome during those somber years following the Society's official suppression. The monumental church of the Gesù loomed ponderously in the nocturnal gloom, its grand portals firmly secured, its sacred altars stripped of their adornments. The faint, sweet scent of extinguished candle smoke persisted merely as a phantom recollection, a ghost of past devotions. Nevertheless, within that profound stillness, one could almost discern the spectral reverberations of hushed supplications, the ethereal swish of ebony vestments gliding over ancient flagstones. This was not the stark auditory signature of complete desolation, but rather the compelling intone of a formidable presence deliberately restrained, patiently poised for its inevitable resurgence. The act of suppression itself had been unequivocally intended to conclude the entire narrative of the Society, to erase its very existence from the annals of history. Instead, paradoxically, it transmuted into an extended interlude, a profound quietude far more disquieting and memorable than any spoken declaration. Within the confines of that protracted stillness, the enigmatic legend surrounding the figure of the Black Pope seemed only to proliferate and intensify, as though his very disappearance from public view served as irrefutable corroboration of his clandestine influence and unseen machinations. This profound period of enforced quietude extended for almost half a century, a significant span of time. Yet, a cessation of public activity is fundamentally distinct from complete annihilation. Across the hushed byways and veiled corners of the European continent, hushed murmurs circulated, hinting at the continued covert operations of Jesuit members. Notably, within the vast expanse of Russia, Empress Catherine the Great had discreetly chosen to disregard the pontifical edict that formally disbanded the Venerable Order. She held in high esteem their pedagogical institutions, their rigorous organizational discipline, and their singular capacity to educate her populace. Consequently, within the expansive borders of her imperial domain, the Society of Jesus persisted with remarkable tenacity, akin to a delicate flame meticulously sheltered from the buffeting winds. Their esteemed colleges remained fully operational. Their dedicated priests continued their sacred duties, albeit clandestinely, and their intricate global networks resolutely persevered. When His Holiness Pope Pius VII at last officially reinstated the order in the pivotal year of 1814, the event felt less like an entirely fresh genesis and more like the dramatic revelation of a truth long concealed. Throughout the eternal city of Rome, the sonorous pealing of church bells resonated through the air as the significant papal bull, Solicitudo Omnium Ecclesiarum, was publicly proclaimed. The Jesuits, who had previously been summarily banished, widely dispersed, and forcibly silenced, were now granted the explicit permission to re-emerge. And indeed, they did so with astonishing alacrity. They swiftly repatriated their venerable educational institutions, reclaiming those hallowed bastions of erudition that had lain dormant and neglected for numerous decades. They meticulously re-established their global missionary endeavors, dispatching zealous priests across vast oceanic expanses once more, journeying back to the ancient lands of China, to the burgeoning territories of the Americas, and to the diverse nations of Africa, bearing with them the profound fortitude and unwavering resilience forged during their period of involuntary exile. However, the truly remarkable aspect of their resurgence was not merely their inherent tenacity or unwavering persistence. It was, rather, the profound manner in which they reappeared with an amplified strength, as if the very act of their suppression had served only to temper and refine them, transforming their collective will into unyielding steel. For the general populace, they manifested primarily as dedicated educators, eloquent homilists, and compassionate spiritual confessors. Yet, for those discerning observers who scrutinized their return with meticulous attention, their re-emergence hinted at an underlying reality of far greater profundity. The perplexing question arose: how could an ecclesiastical order, once so comprehensively dismantled, prescribed by numerous sovereign monarchs, and formally dissolved by a supreme pontiff, manage to resurface with such astonishing vitality and renewed dynamism? What clandestine organizational frameworks or concealed networks had enabled them to withstand such an existential assault and ultimately persevere? Among the more speculative accounts, some quietly suggested the existence of vast subterranean vaults filled with gold, meticulously safeguarded over many centuries, alongside intricate clandestine networks painstakingly maintained in absolute secrecy, and unshakable allegiances solidified through solemn, unspoken vows. Other, more conspiratorial minds firmly held the conviction that the enigmatic Black Pope had, in fact, never relinquished his spiritual authority or ceased his guiding influence. They posited that throughout the arduous years of suppression, his directives had continued to circulate through unseen channels, much like a subterranean river flowing silently beneath the earth, continually sustaining and nurturing unseen roots with its vital currents. By the advent of the 19th century, the Society of Jesus had once again firmly re-established itself at the very epicenter of Roman Catholic ecclesiastical life. Their esteemed members served as trusted counselors to successive pontiffs, and they meticulously cultivated and educated entire generations of brilliant scholars and intellectuals. Their renowned educational institutions experienced a vibrant resurgence, flourishing majestically from the grand boulevards of Paris to the bustling metropolis of New York, from the vibrant capital of Buenos Aires to the historic city of Kolkata. They were demonstrably no longer a mere vestige of a bygone era, but rather an ecclesiastical order dynamically reborn and seamlessly integrated into the unfolding tapestry of modernity. Concurrently, with every incremental step of their renewed prominence, the enduring legend of the Black Pope expanded significantly. His prolonged period of enforced silence had, ironically, become irrefutable evidence of his profound endurance, and his dramatic return served as undeniable proof of his formidable underlying power. Within the hallowed precincts of Rome, the General Curia of the Society of Jesus re-emerged with renewed vigor, assuming its pivotal role as the indisputable nerve center and strategic headquarters of the entire order. Behind its imposing doors, distinguished men clad in their characteristic black robes convened in hushed, secluded chambers, meticulously formulating not only comprehensive strategies for their global missionary endeavors, but also intricate plans for exerting subtle yet profound influence within the very heart of the Vatican itself. To the vast external world, the reigning white pope remained the visible embodiment and official representative of supreme Catholic authority. However, for those perceptive individuals who delved beneath the surface, the figure of the Black Pope was perceived as the unwavering, consistent hand, perpetually concealed, yet ever present, steadfastly enduring, and skillfully directing the complex affairs of the Church from a position of strategic obscurity. The momentous act of restoration was, in its essence, never solely confined to a simple re-entry into their former positions. It represented fundamentally an undeniable triumph of survival, a powerful demonstration that even when sovereign monarchs and supreme pontiffs conspired to utterly obliterate their existence, the Jesuits proved themselves to be indomitable and ultimately indestructible. Their astonishing resurrection in 1814 served as a profound, enduring lesson, subtly conveyed across the expanse of centuries, that periods of enforced silence can indeed be stoically endured, that the hardships of exile can be successfully weathered, and that from the crucible of suppression, a new form of power can be meticulously reborn, one that is notably more discreet, significantly more adaptable, and profoundly more concealed than it had ever been in its previous incarnation. In the profound stillness of the nocturnal hours, one might vividly conjure a compelling tableau, a lone candle flickering back to life within the shadowed confines of a long darkened chapel, its gentle flame illuminating the solemn assembly of black-robed figures once again convening in hushed reverence. One might almost perceive the imposing silhouette of a general, the superior of the order, reoccupying his accustomed chair. The enigmatic Black Pope, though physically absent from public view, was symbolically never truly departed, now reinstated with such seamless continuity that it appeared as if he had never, in fact, relinquished his post. The entirety of the 19th century unfolded as a tumultuous epoch characterized by the ascendancy and decline of monarchs and the seismic upheavals of revolutions, an era where royal crowns were ignominiously toppled and vast empires were dramatically reforged. Yet amidst the deafening clamor of marching armies and the fervent exclamations of burgeoning nations, another, far more subtle presence quietly persisted, an unseen influence, nonetheless frequently alluded to in hushed tones within every royal throne room. Jesuit confessors, distinguished in their somber black robes, stood discreetly alongside reigning monarchs, their vestments casting elongated shadows across the opulent, gilded chambers. They communicated in subdued tones, not asserting themselves as overt rulers, but rather functioning as sagacious spiritual and political guides, delicately imparting their counsel into the receptive ears of emperors and queens, all while the ambient candlelight softly danced across the lustrous surfaces of polished marble floors. From the sophisticated salons of Paris to the imperial palaces of Vienna, and from the grand courts of Madrid to countless other European capitals, the Jesuits meticulously orchestrated their return to the very royal establishments where, merely a century prior, their presence had been met with profound apprehension and suspicion. Monarchs who had harbored deep mistrust towards them in an earlier age now actively solicited their sagacious guidance. In the tumultuous aftermath of widespread revolutions, these rulers desperately yearned for a return to political stability, for the comforting imprimatur of divine sanction, and for even a faint suggestion of restored order. Jesuit advisors, operating with characteristic discretion, adeptly supplied these crucial elements, presenting their counsel cloaked in the venerable language of religious faith, yet imbued with the subtle, incisive precision of carefully calculated strategy. Yet, it was not exclusively reigning monarchs who gravitated towards the burgeoning influence of the society. Distinguished politicians, influential military generals, and even members of rival ecclesiastical orders invariably experienced the extensive and pervasive reach of Jesuit influence. Their educational institutions, meticulously reconstructed and reinvigorated with remarkable dynamism, cultivated and produced successive generations of national leaders, rigorously trained in the arts of rhetoric, profound philosophy, and intricate legal principles. A powerful prime minister in one sovereign state, a charismatic revolutionary leader in another. Countless prominent figures bore the indelible imprint of Jesuit pedagogical methods, whether they openly acknowledged it or not. It was as though the order had subtly placed invisible hands upon the intricate levers of national governance, not seizing direct control, but rather meticulously calibrating, gently nudging, and expertly steering the course of nations with an extraordinary degree of patient, long-term calculation. Indeed, some critics openly leveled accusations against the Jesuits, alleging that they were surreptitiously manipulating the intricate strings behind momentous global events that were often too vast and complex to definitively trace. When widespread revolutions violently erupted, when powerful kings were dethroned, and when novel constitutional frameworks were painstakingly established, a persistent tide of rumors inevitably circulated. Was such monumental change merely the product of historical coincidence? Or had the clandestine agents of the Black Pope been subtly navigating the tumultuous currents of these upheavals, orchestrating outcomes from the shadows? The French Revolution, which had once forcibly silenced the society, paradoxically saw its subsequent aftershocks appear to inadvertently expand the Jesuit sphere of influence. In nations such as Spain, Portugal, and even within the fragmented territories of Italy itself, governmental structures rose and precipitously fell in relentless cycles of political turmoil, and invariably, in the discernible background, a Jesuit was consistently rumored to be present, offering shrewd advice, subtly correcting missteps, and deftly directing affairs through the persuasive power of whispered suggestions rather than overt commands. The pervasive legend surrounding the society intensified significantly in the year 1870, a pivotal moment when the venerable papal states were irrevocably lost, and the ancient city of Rome itself was incorporated into a nascent kingdom. Consequently, the temporal, earthly power of the white pope experienced a marked diminution. Yet, remarkably, the Jesuits did not, to the astonishment of many, suffer a corresponding decline in influence alongside him. Instead, with characteristic sagacity, they demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for adaptation. Their fundamental strength resided not in military might or geographical borders, but rather in the cultivation of intellects and the forging of loyalties bound by intricate, invisible threads of conviction. Where other nations perceived only imminent collapse and widespread disarray, the Jesuits astutely discerned emergent new pathways for influence. Where traditional crowns crumbled and monarchies dissolved, they strategically offered a potent sense of stability. And this very provision of stability granted them unparalleled access to the corridors of new power. In consequence, within the hallowed halls of every royal palace and the deliberative chambers of every parliament, there appeared to linger an almost imperceptible shadow, perhaps a learned priest meticulously educated in Jesuit institutions, or a shrewd diplomat rumored to possess clandestine connections to the Curia, or even a formidable general whose strategic acumen had been honed under their rigorous guidance. The enigmatic Black Pope, it became evident, harbored no necessity for a visible throne or overt temporal dominion. He commanded something far more potent and pervasive, the extraordinary capacity to subtly manipulate the very thrones of power themselves, not through brute force or open coercion, but rather through an insidious form of influence, so exquisitely nuanced and discreet that no reigning monarch could ever definitively ascertain where the genesis of his own sovereign decisions concluded, and the intricate design of another's agenda subtly commenced. For the vast majority of the ordinary faithful, the Jesuits presented themselves primarily as dedicated missionaries and exemplary educators. However, for the discerning gaze of monarchs and their influential ministers, they embodied an almost spectral, silent presence within the inner sanctums of power. Individuals who meticulously retained every solemn promise uttered in the sanctity of confession, who discreetly recalled every vulnerability shared in hushed secrecy, and who, most profoundly, held within their subtle grasp the delicate, intricate strings of conscience itself. It was precisely within such profound discretion and strategic silence that their formidable power extended its reach far more extensively and profoundly than the territorial advances of any conquering army. Thus, the 19th century transcended its designation merely as an era defined by the emergence and consolidation of nation-states. It metamorphosed into an age characterized by pervasive whispers and subtle machinations. It was a period where the elusive shadow of the Black Pope extended its influence into every regal throne room, every legislative parliament, and every clandestine council chamber, fostering an environment where, beneath the gentle, flickering illumination of candlelight, sovereign kings were often left to ponder with disquieting uncertainty whether their most pivotal decisions were, in their profoundest essence, truly their own independent judgments. When the venerable College of Cardinals convenes in solemn assembly beneath the magnificent frescoed vaults of the Sistine Chapel, the collective gaze of the world invariably fixates upon the telltale plumes of smoke destined to ascend, whether black, signaling rejection, or white, heralding a coronation. Yet for countless centuries, beneath the weighty solemnity of these sacred rituals and the resonant cadences of chanted prayers, persistent whispers have circulated, hinting at the surreptitious operation of another guiding hand, one that, while never physically appearing upon the hallowed ballot papers, nonetheless exerted a profound and palpable influence upon every single vote cast. The Jesuits, despite having been traditionally proscribed from ascending to the papacy until quite recently in history, were, in practice, never truly absent from the sequestered proceedings of papal conclaves. They did not participate as voting electors themselves, but rather served in crucial capacities as trusted confessors, sagacious spiritual advisors, and the subtle, persuasive voices operating discreetly behind the venerable scarlet-robed cardinals. Some gained entry not as direct voters, but as profound guardians of moral conscience, meticulously molding the inner reflections and silent deliberations of the men poised to cast their fateful ballots. Thus, the enduring rumor persisted that the enigmatic Black Pope, residing far removed from the immediate confines of the Sistine Chapel, wielded an equivalent, if not greater, degree of influence as those eminent figures physically gathered within. This was unequivocally not a matter of crude, overt manipulation, but rather something far more sophisticated and exquisitely refined. Highly esteemed Jesuit scholars, renowned for their unparalleled mastery of persuasive rhetoric and their acute powers of discernment, were frequently rumored to be instrumental in meticulously forging crucial alliances and shaping political landscapes long before the heavy doors of the conclave were finally sealed. They possessed an intimate understanding of the fervent ambitions harbored by particular cardinals, the profound anxieties afflicting others, and the delicate promises discreetly exchanged in hushed tones within the echoing corridors, where the opulent marble surfaces seemed to absorb all sound. Consequently, when the ballots were ceremoniously incinerated, signaling the conclusion of a vote, it was often widely conjectured that a hand subtly guided by Jesuit training and strategic insight had already decisively influenced the ultimate outcome. The momentous election of Pius IX in the middle of the 19th century immediately ignited intense speculation, particularly as his pontificate was destined to be characterized by both an extraordinary length and a period of immense ecclesiastical and political upheaval. The lingering question arose: was his elevation to the sacred chair of Peter simply a matter of divine providence, or was it the direct result of the meticulous and persuasive counsel offered by influential Jesuit voices? His subsequent declaration of papal infallibility proved to be an exceptionally audacious, even profoundly divisive pronouncement. Nevertheless, the Jesuits staunchly and fiercely championed this doctrine, meticulously constructing intricate theological arguments that successfully solidified the controversial decree into an unassailable article of faith. In this significant instance, the pervasive shadow of the Black Pope appeared to extend its reach into the very foundational definition of papal authority itself. In the tumultuous sweep of the 20th century, as the global landscape convulsed under the weight of cataclysmic wars that radically redefined national borders and irrevocably shattered ancient imperial structures, those same persistent whispers of clandestine influence resurfaced. Some commentators, peering into the intricate web of wartime diplomacy, posited the Jesuit machinations underpinned Pope Benedict XV's earnest, albeit ultimately unsuccessful, endeavors for peace during the harrowing years of the First World War. Later, attention turned to the controversial election of Pius XII, a pontiff whose conduct and decisions throughout the Second World War continued to be interpreted through a complex and often contradictory lens of historical debate, clouded by pressing inquiries into his periods of profound silence, his strategic diplomatic maneuvers, and the intricate, often veiled negotiations he undertook. It appeared that beneath the surface of every significant papal selection, an almost imperceptible, yet sometimes strikingly evident, Jesuit thread could be discerned, weaving through the fabric of the Church's highest office. However, the most profound and universally acknowledged moment of sheer astonishment arrived in the year 2013, when the sacred conclave of cardinals utterly demolished centuries of established tradition and procedure. For the very first time in the annals of its extensive history, a member of the Society of Jesus was elevated to the papacy. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, choosing the venerable name Francis, did not merely step onto the hallowed balcony as the newly elected Bishop of Rome, but rather as the inaugural Jesuit pontiff. To a segment of observers and faithful alike, this unprecedented event represented the culmination of centuries of patient, strategic positioning, a Jesuit finally adorned with the symbolic white cassock of papal authority. To others, it signified the definitive dissolution of an ancient, deeply entrenched barrier, offering irrefutable evidence that the perceived demarcation between the formidable Black Pope and the revered White Pope had become far more permeable than previously imagined. Yet, even in the immediate aftermath of this groundbreaking election, within the hushed and cloistered confines of Vatican City, another, more profound query began to circulate in soft, speculative tones. If a Jesuit now legitimately wore the pristine white robe of the Roman pontiff, what then became of the man who steadfastly continued to wear the traditional black habit, the superior general of the Society of Jesus? Had his historical authority and formidable influence somehow been diminished by this unexpected turn of events? Or conversely, had his reach and power only intensified, now mysteriously united in a complex and enigmatic duality with the Holy Father himself? For it is upon such profound and unresolved enigmas that the realm of late-night speculation thrives, suggesting that conclaves might encompass far more than the mere casting of ballots and the subsequent puff of smoke, and that in the profound hush of earnest prayers and the soft rustle of ceremonial vestments, there are discernible echoes of pivotal decisions that were meticulously shaped and solidified long before the sacred doors of the Sistine Chapel were ever ceremoniously sealed. And so the enduring myth persists with unwavering tenacity that in the solemnity of every papal conclave, while the College of Cardinals certainly casts its votes and ultimately makes its choice, another subtle yet omnipresent force silently guides the proceedings. This guidance is not exerted through overt command or formal decree, but rather through the unseen, unyielding compass of profound loyalty, unwavering obedience, and rigorous intellectual and spiritual formation. The indelible mark of Jesuit discipline that even the resplendent scarlet robes of the cardinals cannot possibly erase. The white pope ascends to his exalted position, and the majestic bells of St. Peter's Basilica peal forth in a triumphant chorus. But in the profound silence that descends beyond the exuberant roar of the assembled multitude, the spectral shadow of the Black Pope steadfastly remains, almost as if the conclave itself culminates in two distinct coronations, one overtly public, witnessed by the entire world, and the other shrouded in an impenetrable veil of secrecy. As it has for 2 millennia, night gracefully descends upon Rome, casting its familiar tranquil veil of silence over the ancient city. The venerable stones of the Vatican complex gradually cool in the crisp evening air, the vast, expansive piazza slowly emptying of the throngs of pilgrims who, only hours before, had reverently lifted their gazes toward the magnificent dome of St. Peter's Basilica. Yet, when the last flickering torchlight finally fades and the resonant echoes of the day's chants gently dissolve into the realm of memory, a different, more profound kind of quietude takes hold. Not the passive silence of slumber, but rather the active, watchful stillness of an ever-vigilant presence, always watching. For the intricate narrative of the Black Pope does not culminate with the outcomes of conclaves or the pronouncements of ecumenical councils, nor does it conclude with the mere survival of devastating wars or the endurance of sweeping revolutions. Instead, its influence stretches inexorably onward, extending through the intricate, often labyrinthine corridors of modern global power, where the complex forces of politics, finance, and profound faith are inextricably woven together into a tapestry so intricate that only a select few can ever fully perceive its complete design. The superior general of the Jesuits no longer dons medieval armor, nor does he dispatch fleets of ships across vast oceans to distant lands. Yet, his profound reach remains boundless and expansive, meticulously carried forth in the form of countless schools, prestigious universities, far-flung missions, and, most crucially, in the hearts and minds of men whose loyalty runs deeper and more enduring than the bonds of mere blood. Some commentators dismiss these persistent claims as nothing more than elaborate conspiracy theories, while others categorize them as enduring myths. Yet, in hushed whispers that circulate through influential circles, the Jesuits are still consistently depicted as the Church's most discreet and effective diplomats, its most rigorously disciplined and strategic thinkers, and its most formidable and unwavering defenders. A mind meticulously trained in the Jesuit tradition can be found not exclusively within the hallowed halls of seminaries, but equally within the august chambers of parliaments, the sophisticated environments of embassies, and the towering bastions of both advanced knowledge and global finance. And wherever these highly influential individuals are situated, the elusive shadow of their leader invariably follows, whether consciously perceived or entirely unseen, explicitly acknowledged or forever unnamed. The Vatican itself undergoes constant shifts and reforms, and popes, though revered, ultimately rise and fall from power. Yet the omnipresent presence of the Black Pope appears to be eternal, almost as if the role itself has transcended into a kind of enduring specter, never formally crowned, never publicly visible, yet always undeniably there. When the White Pope makes his grand appearances on the iconic balconies, bathed in the thunderous applause of the adoring masses, the Black Pope remains in the quiet solitude of his discreet residence, not by virtue of weakness or lack of influence, but rather in shadow by deliberate, strategic design. His immense power has never been intended for public spectacle or ostentatious display. In the complex tapestry of the modern world, whenever profound global crises erupt, be they devastating wars, widespread scandals, or the precipitous collapse of national and international economies, there are invariably those who adamantly insist that the guiding hand of the Jesuits can still be distinctly traced. They contend that beyond the carefully crafted speeches and the official decrees, another, more subtle voice persistently lingers, calm, meticulously deliberate, profoundly strategic, and utterly unseen. Whether this assertion represents an undeniable truth or merely an elaborate fable, no one can state with absolute certainty. Yet the sheer weight of this belief itself carries significant influence, and with the circulation of every new rumor, the potent legend only grows demonstrably stronger. And so, as the relentless centuries continue their inexorable turn, the powerful image steadfastly remains, the Black Pope serving as both a mirror and a profound counterpart, a compelling shadow to the radiant light of Peter's successor. Not a direct rival, nor an overt enemy, but rather something far more intricate and nuanced. A vigilant guardian, a sagacious counselor, a master strategist, and sometimes, in the fearful imaginings of certain individuals, even a covert puppet master. The ultimate truth of this relationship is undoubtedly tangled, frustratingly elusive, and perhaps purposefully obscured within the intricate folds of history. Now, in the gentle embrace of the night, let this final, contemplative thought softly drift across the mind, much like the ethereal tendrils of candle smoke. What if, throughout the long and storied history of Rome, there have always existed two distinct thrones? One, a magnificent edifice of marble, sumptuously gilded and crowned for the entire world to behold and admire. And another, a throne crafted entirely of shadow, where a man cloaked in black quietly guides the destiny of the Church, not through formal decrees, but through the profound command of hearts and minds. The world sleeps, the ancient city sleeps, but that enduring shadow, it seems, never does. And thus, the last profound question lingers, as soft and ephemeral as a whisper at the very edge of dreams. If the White Pope is entrusted with the sacred keys of heaven, what then does the enigmatic Black Pope truly carry?